Some machines are built to save lives. Others are built with so much raw power, they end up killing their own drivers. During the Cold War, the Soviet Union built some extreme vehicles, bigger, faster, heavier, but not always safer. So what happens when power goes too far? Over time, a few of these machines became known as banned, not because of public orders, but because crashes, fires, and violent failed tests made them too dangerous to keep using. In this list, you'll see a car that turned deadly at high speed, a prototype that destroyed itself during testing, and a giant machine so powerful it made the ground shake when it moved. Today, we're counting down 10 Soviet vehicles that pushed power too far. Let's get started. Number 10. The ZIL-132, the truck that destroyed itself. Let's start with a vehicle that looked like it came straight out of a Mad Max film. The ZIL-132, developed in the early 1960s, was an experimental off-road platform that the Soviets hoped would revolutionize military transport. This beast stretched over 23 feet long and rode on 6 massive pneumatic tires, each one over 5 feet tall. But here's where things got interesting. The ZIL-132 had no traditional suspension. Instead, it relied entirely on those giant low-pressure tires to absorb shock. The idea was simple: create a truck that could float over swamps, snow, and soft terrain like a mechanical snowshoe. Under the hood sat a ZIL-375 V8 gasoline engine pumping out 180 horsepower. It featured a complex drivetrain with a 5-speed manual transmission, a 2-speed transfer case, and a pneumatic differential locking system. On paper, it was brilliant. In reality, it was a nightmare. During field tests, engineers discovered the ZIL-132 could only reach speeds of about 55 kilometers per hour, and at those speeds, it became dangerously unstable. The lack of proper suspension meant every bump, every dip in the terrain sent violent vibrations through the entire chassis. Drivers reported that controlling the truck at anything above crawling speed felt like wrestling a mechanical bull. The steering was heavy, unpredictable, and required constant correction. But the real problem: the truck was literally shaking itself apart. The vibrations were so intense that bolts would loosen, welds would crack, and components would fail after just a few hours of operation. Then came the final blow. During testing in 1962, the singular prototype caught fire and was completely destroyed. Some reports suggest the fire was caused by fuel line failure due to constant vibration. Others whisper that the military deliberately ended the project because they realized the design was fundamentally flawed. Either way, the ZIL-132 program was discontinued, and the truck earned its place as one of the Soviet Union's most dangerous experimental failures. Today, only photographs remain of this massive machine, a reminder that sometimes innovation and insanity walk a very thin line. Number 9. The ZIL-157R, unstable on 6 wheels. If the ZIL-132 was dangerous, its predecessor, the ZIL-157R, was equally terrifying for completely different reasons. Built in the late 1950s as a prototype based on the standard ZIL-157 military truck, the 157R was an attempt to create an all-terrain cargo hauler using massive arch tires. This 2.5-ton truck featured 6 wheels, all fitted with enormous low-pressure tires designed to distribute weight and improve off-road capability. It looked impressive, almost alien, with those bulbous tires making it seem like something from another planet. But looks can be deceiving. Soviet engineers quickly discovered that the ZIL-157R had severe handling problems. The truck's high center of gravity, combined with the soft, flexible tires, created a vehicle that was incredibly prone to tipping over. During turns, especially on uneven terrain, the truck would lean dramatically to one side. Drivers described it as feeling like the entire vehicle was about to roll over at any moment. Making matters worse, the steering was described in official reports as difficult in terms of drive control. What does that mean exactly? It means the truck fought you every step of the way. The massive tires created enormous resistance when turning, and the lack of power steering made maneuvering the vehicle an exhausting physical ordeal. But the most dangerous aspect: unpredictability. On soft terrain like mud or snow, the truck performed reasonably well, but on harder surfaces or at higher speeds, it became a death trap. The combination of unstable handling and difficult steering meant that drivers had to maintain constant, intense focus. One moment of distraction, one overcorrection, and the ZIL-157R could flip or spin out of control. After extensive testing, the Soviet military decided the risks outweighed the benefits. The project was quietly discontinued, and the ZIL-157R was relegated to the history books. Very few photographs exist of this truck, and even fewer people remember it today. But for the test drivers who had to wrestle with this mechanical monster, the ZIL-157R left an impression that lasted a lifetime. Number 8. The Tatra 603, the executive's death trap. Now, here's where our story takes an interesting turn. The Tatra 603 wasn't technically a Soviet vehicle. It was made in Czechoslovakia, a Soviet satellite state. But this luxury sedan has such a dark reputation that it deserves a spot on our list. Produced from 1956 to 1975, the Tatra 603 was supposed to be the car for high-ranking Communist Party officials. It featured a sleek, aerodynamic design with a powerful air-cooled V8 engine mounted in the rear, producing around 95 horsepower, top speed, about 100 miles per hour, which was incredibly fast for the era. But that rear-mounted engine created a serious problem. Extreme weight bias toward the back of the car, combined with a long wheelbase and swing axle rear suspension. The Tatra 603 had handling characteristics that can only be described as murderous. When driven at high speeds, especially around corners, the heavy rear end would break loose, causing sudden and violent oversteer. The car would spin out with almost no warning, sending it careening into trees, ditches, or oncoming traffic. Stories from the era claim that the Tatra 603 was nicknamed the Widowmaker among party officials. Some reports suggest that more communist officials died in Tatra accidents than from political purges during certain years. While that's likely an exaggeration, the car's reputation was so bad that some officials reportedly refused to ride in them. The problem was well known but rarely discussed publicly. After all, admitting that the luxury car designed for the elite was killing its passengers wasn't exactly good propaganda. Czechoslovakian engineers tried to improve the handling with various suspension modifications, but the fundamental design flaw remained. By the 1970s, the Tatra 603's reputation had become so toxic that even though the car continued in production, many officials opted for imported Western vehicles instead. Today, the Tatra 603 is a collector's item, prized for its unique design and Cold War history. But for those who lived through the era, it remains a symbol of how Soviet engineering sometimes prioritized appearance and power over basic safety. Number 7. The Namai O-157 Crocodile. The swamp monster. In the early 1970s, Soviet engineers at the Namai Research Institute decided to build something truly radical, a vehicle that could cross terrain where even tracked vehicles would sink. The result was the Namai O-157, nicknamed Crocodile because of its low, sprawling appearance. This experimental all-terrain vehicle didn't use wheels or tracks. Instead, it moved on 4 massive screw-like cylinders, each one rotating to propel the vehicle forward through mud, water, and snow. Each screw was about 6 feet in diameter and hollow, allowing the vehicle to float. The cab was mounted on top, elevated above the screws to keep the crew dry and safe, or so they thought. In testing, the Namai O-157 proved it could go places no other vehicle could reach. It plowed through meter-deep swamps, crossed frozen rivers, and climbed over obstacles that would stop conventional vehicles cold. But it was also incredibly slow. Top speed on land, about 10 kilometers per hour. On water, even slower, around 4 kilometers per hour. But speed wasn't the real problem, control was. Those rotating screws created unpredictable movement, especially in mixed terrain. Transitioning from solid ground to water, or from snow to mud, would cause the vehicle to lurch and roll in unexpected ways. Drivers reported feeling seasick after just a few minutes of operation. The noise was deafening. The screws would dig into the ground, throwing up debris that would constantly bombard the cab, and maintenance, a nightmare. The screws would get clogged with mud, vegetation, and ice. Cleaning them required hours of work after every mission. But the most dangerous aspect was crossing water. If one screw stopped working, the entire vehicle would begin to spin in circles, potentially capsizing and drowning the crew. After several near accidents during testing, the project was discontinued in the mid-1970s. The Namai O-157 remains one of the most bizarre and impractical vehicles ever built by the Soviet Union, a solution desperately searching for a problem that didn't exist. Number 6. The ZIL-29261, the screw-propelled nightmare. You'd think after the failure of the NAM-I-0157, the Soviets would give up on screw-propelled vehicles. You'd be wrong. In the late 1970s, they built the ZIL-29061, an even larger screw-driven monster designed specifically for the Soviet space program. This machine was built to recover cosmonauts who landed in remote, inaccessible areas of Siberia. It featured two massive screw drums, each over 8 feet in diameter, and could carry up to 6 people plus equipment. The cab was fully enclosed and heated, making it seem like a safer option than previous designs. And in some ways, it was. The ZIL-29061 could cross terrain that would be impossible for any other vehicle. Deep snow, frozen lakes, thick forest, nothing stopped it. But that capability came at a terrible price. First, the control system was incredibly complex. Each screw was independently powered, and coordinating them required constant attention from the driver. Turn too hard, and the vehicle would spin violently, accelerate unevenly, and it would tip sideways. Second, the screws had zero traction on hard surfaces. Driving on solid ground or ice meant the vehicle would simply spin in place, the screws unable to grip anything. This made it useless for mixed terrain operations. Third, and most dangerously, the ZIL-29061 was prone to mechanical failure. The screw drive system was incredibly complex, with hundreds of moving parts that needed constant maintenance. In the harsh Siberian cold, parts would freeze, lubricants would congeal, and the entire system would seize up. One cosmonaut recovery mission in 1980 nearly ended in disaster when the ZIL-29061 broke down in the middle of a frozen lake. The crew had to be evacuated by helicopter, while the vehicle was left to be recovered later. After that incident, the Soviet space program began relying more heavily on traditional helicopters for recovery operations. The ZIL-29061 continued to be used sporadically through the 1980s, but it was never considered reliable enough for critical missions. Today, one example sits in a Russian museum, a testament to Soviet determination to conquer nature, no matter how impractical the solution. Number 5. The Object 279, the nuclear tank. Now we're entering truly insane territory. The Object 279 wasn't just dangerous to drive, it was designed to survive a nuclear explosion and keep fighting. Built in 1957 as an experimental heavy tank, the Object 279 looked like something from an alien invasion. It featured 4 tracks, unusual elliptical armor, and a massive 113Ws cannon. But the most striking feature was its size and weight. This monster weighed 60 tons and was over 23 feet long. Those 4 tracks were designed to distribute its enormous weight and allow it to cross soft terrain without sinking. The elliptical armor wasn't just for show. It was designed to deflect the shockwave from a nuclear blast, protecting the crew inside. And the massive engine, a 1,000 horsepower diesel, gave it surprising speed for its size. But here's where things got dangerous. Those 4 tracks made the Object 279 incredibly difficult to steer. The driver had to coordinate the movement of all 4 tracks simultaneously, and any mistake would cause the tank to pivot violently or even throw a track. The suspension system was so complex that it required constant maintenance, and the weight created enormous stress on every component. During testing, the Object 279 repeatedly broke down. Tracks would snap, suspension arms would crack, the engine would overheat. But the real nail in the coffin, the Soviet military realized that if a nuclear war actually happened, tanks would be largely irrelevant. Missiles had made heavy armor obsolete. After building only one prototype, the project was cancelled in 1959. The Object 279 was too complex, too heavy, and too expensive to justify. Today, that single prototype sits in a Russian tank museum, a reminder of the Cold War arms race at its most excessive. Number 4. The Antonov A-40 flying tank. Physics says no. In 1942, Soviet designer Oleg Antonov proposed something that sounds like a joke. What if we put wings on a tank and flew it into battle? But this wasn't a joke. The Antonov A-40 was a real prototype, and it actually flew, sort of. The concept was simple. Attach a massive biplane wing assembly to a T-60 light tank. A bomber would tow the whole contraption into the air like a glider. Once near the battlefield, the tank would detach and glide down to Earth, shed its wings, and immediately enter combat. In theory, brilliant. In practice, Absolutely insane. The A-40's maiden flight in 1942 was a disaster. The TB-3 bomber towing it couldn't generate enough power to lift the heavily loaded glider to a safe altitude. The drag was so enormous that the bomber's engines began to overheat. The pilot was forced to cut the tank loose early. The tank glided back to Earth, landing hard but intact. The pilot inside survived, probably questioning every life choice that led him to that moment. The Soviet military immediately recognized the fundamental problem. The physics simply didn't work. A tank, even a light tank, was too heavy to glide effectively. And even if it could, landing a multi-ton vehicle traveling at high speed was a recipe for disaster. The project was canceled, and Antonov went on to design much more successful aircraft. But the A-40 remains one of the most bizarre and dangerous experiments in Soviet military history, a flying tank. What could possibly go wrong? Number 3, the Tsar tank, the tricycle of death. Going back even further, to 1914, we find perhaps the most absurd Soviet-era vehicle ever conceived. Actually, it was Russian Imperial, before the Soviet Union even existed. But it's too insane not to include. The Tsar tank was designed during World War I as a solution to trench warfare. Instead of using tracks like normal tanks, Russian engineer Nikolai Lebedenko designed it with two massive front wheels, each 27 feet in diameter, and a single small wheel in the rear. The result looked like a giant tricycle with a fortified platform in the middle. The front wheels were so large because Lebedenko believed they could simply roll over trenches and obstacles, and the elevated platform would allow mounted cannons to fire over terrain. But during its first test in August 1915, the Tsar tank revealed its fatal flaw, that small rear wheel, because it bore too much weight and had far less surface area than the front wheels. It immediately sank into soft ground. The massive front wheels would climb out, but the rear wheel would dig deeper. The tank became stuck. Engineers tried everything to free it. They dug around the wheel. They added more power. They even tried pushing with other vehicles. Nothing worked. For hours, the Tsar tank sat immobilized in a field, its massive wheels spinning uselessly. The project was abandoned immediately, and the tank was left to rust where it sat. It remained there until 1923, when it was finally dismantled for scrap. The Tsar tank represents Soviet engineering at its most overconfident. A vehicle so impractical that it couldn't even complete its first test drive, and yet, in typical fashion, they built it anyway. Number 2, the K-84 Ekaterinburg submarine, the Mobile Chernobyl. Our second entry isn't technically banned, but it probably should have been. The Ka-4 Ekaterinburg is a nuclear-powered ballistic missile submarine nearly 550 feet long, carrying 16 nuclear missiles and powered by 2 nuclear reactors. Built in 1982, it served for decades without major incident, until 2011. While docked for maintenance in Roslyakovo, Russia, workers were performing routine welding on wooden scaffolding near the submarine's bow. A spark ignited the wood, and within minutes, the fire spread to the submarine itself. For an entire day, firefighters battled the blaze, while the submarine sat carrying 4 nuclear missiles and 2 active nuclear reactors. If those reactors had melted down, it would have caused a nuclear disaster comparable to Chernobyl, contaminating the entire northern coast of Russia and potentially spreading radiation across Europe. What makes this especially terrifying? This wasn't the first fire on a Soviet submarine. Throughout the Cold War, there were multiple incidents of fires, reactor leaks, and near disasters. The Soviet Navy's safety record was, to put it mildly, horrific. The K-84 survived and was eventually repaired, but the incident revealed just how dangerous these nuclear submarines truly are. They're essentially mobile nuclear power plants, carrying enough explosive and radioactive material to devastate entire regions. And the Soviet Union built 245 of them, more than all other nations combined. Today, many of those submarines sit rusting in naval yards, their reactors still active, slowly leaking radiation into the environment, a ticking time bomb from the Cold War that we're still trying to defuse. Number 1, the MAZ-7907, the 24-wheeled earthquake machine, and finally, we arrive at number 1, the most powerful, most dangerous, and most absolutely insane vehicle the Soviet Union ever built. The MAZ-7907. This isn't just a truck, it's a mobile earthquake. Built in the mid-1980s to carry the Selena II intercontinental ballistic missile, the MAZ-7907 featured 24 wheels, 12 axles, and a length of over 90 feet. To put that in perspective, that's longer than a blue whale. The truck was so large it had two separate driver cabins, one at each end, with the massive missile resting between them. The front cabin drove the vehicle forward. The rear cabin drove it backward. Turning this monster required both drivers working in perfect coordination. But the real insanity, the propulsion system. The MiS 7907 was powered by a gas turbine engine producing 250 horsepower, not a diesel, a helicopter-style turbine. This engine converted its power into electricity, which powered 24 separate electric motors, one for each wheel. When this machine started moving, the ground literally shook. Residents reported feeling vibrations in their homes when the MiS 7907 passed by, even from miles away. The sound was described as terrifying, a deep, rumbling roar that seemed to come from the earth itself. But controlling this monster, nearly impossible. The two-cabin design meant that neither driver could see the entire vehicle. Communication between them was done via radio, and any miscommunication could result in the truck jackknifing or toppling over. The 24-wheel drive system, while impressive, was incredibly complex. If even one motor failed, the entire vehicle would pull to one side, potentially causing a catastrophic rollover. And at 90 feet long and carrying a 100-ton nuclear missile, a rollover would be absolutely devastating. Fortunately, the Soviet Union collapsed before the MiS 7907 could enter service. Only two prototypes were ever built, and both were quietly scrapped. Today, only photographs remain of this mechanical Leviathan, the largest, most powerful, and most uncontrollable truck ever built. A machine so massive that even the Soviets, who never met an excessive design they didn't like, decided it was simply too much. And there you have it, 10 Soviet vehicles that pushed engineering to its absolute limits, and then drove straight past them into the realm of insanity. From trucks that shook themselves apart to cars that killed their own passengers, these machines represent an era when power and ambition outweighed common sense. Now, remember what I said at the beginning. The word banned might not appear in official reports, but the catastrophic failures, the hushed-up accidents, and the fatal test runs, those speak louder than any document. These vehicles were too dangerous to control. Whether it was poor design, unstable handling, or just plain recklessness, these machines earned their place in history as some of the most terrifying ever built. So tell me in the comments, which of these vehicles shocked you the most? Would you have been brave or crazy enough to drive any of them? And if you enjoyed this journey through Soviet engineering madness, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications, because every week we're bringing you more incredible stories of machines that defied logic, ignored physics, and occasionally literally caught on fire. See you in the next video.